Hello and welcome to the Action Network Podcast, UFC Betting Preview. I'm your host, Sean Zerillo, joined today by Billy Ward to help you break down UFC 319 and give you our best bets, favorite underdogs, top props, and more. And if you'd like to tell some of the bets that we discuss on today's show, make sure to find the quick slip links both in the podcast and the video description, or go to actionnetwork.com/betnow. 13-fight card from the United Center in Chicago, Illinois. UFC has not been back here since 2019. 8 prelims starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5-fight main card, 10 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. We'll not be saying that for very much longer, only through the end of the year, as UFC signing that $7.7 billion deal with Paramount Plus. Big news this week. Big news for you also this week, Billy Ward. You're going to be getting back inside, back on the mats for a grappling match in mid-September. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to handicapping that match with you as well as we get a little bit closer to it. But big card here, arguably my favorite card of the year. And I don't know if the UFC is capable of putting on a more interesting or bigger fight right now. Maybe Saruki and Makhachev is a bigger fight, but I don't know if there is a more interesting fight right now than Dricus Du Plessis against Khamzat Chimaev. They're going to throw it down for the middleweight title around 12:15 a.m. Eastern on Sunday morning as this card goes into the wee hours of the night. Now, the general consensus take, I think, this week is Khamzat early or Du Plessis late. Not so dissimilar from the Dolides early, Hernandez late angle as last week. A little bit different of a cardio dynamic, and the fighter is certainly different stylistically. But in terms of betting the fight, I think that is the general take this week is DDP late, Khamzat early. Now, I do want to point out with regard to the cardio issue, Khamzat changed his camp before this fight. He moved out to California. He's been training in the garage with Arman Tsarukyan and Aaron Pico. We'll get to Pico in a minute, but Arman Tsarukyan made it very clear in an interview that Khamzat in the past has overtrained, constantly overtrains coming into his fights. If you've ever heard Khamzat speak, if you've ever watched him move, he just seems like a guy who would overtrain and would do too much and not know how to rein himself in. Well, apparently he's had a conditioning coach, monitoring his output during this camp and forcing him to stop overtraining so that he is optimized on fight night. Billy, thought it was very interesting that he used the curtain at weigh-ins today because he came in at 183 pounds. He was well under the limit. Had the curtain, though, up in front of him, which means a guy typically is like barely, making weight. So I don't know if there was a difference between the scale in the back and the scale when they actually came out front. We'll see how the other fighters are weighing in if they're underweight too. I think it points to the scale potentially being off. But all of that is to say, I think we're going to see career best cardio from Khamzat on Saturday. And if he does not fade, I don't know who beats this guy because the power is insane. The grappling is insane. The strength and speed combination, absolutely incredible. I think DDP is a phenomenal champion. I think he's been incredibly underrated. And if this fight does extend, I think he will have opportunities to either close the show or win minutes down the stretch. But from the outset, Khamzat shoots in the first 20 seconds in every one of his fights. The only fight where he didn't, he knocked out GM3 in 15 seconds, was tossing DC around on the street in front of the hotel the other day. This guy's just freakishly strong. And I think no matter what, if you want to bet DDP, you get a better live price after round one, if not round two. So the ways I'm looking to play this, the way I see value on this fight, I really like the bet that Billy's going to give out. I'm going to let him give that one out. But alternatives to that bet, same game parlays, Khamzat in the under 1.5 rounds plus 163, or you could just take the under 1.5 at plus 140. The under 2.5, I believe, is around minus 120. You could same game parlay that with Khamzat at about plus 105. And then Khamzat in the under 3.5 rounds is minus 120. I don't know if I see him finishing in the third or in the fourth round, early in the fourth round, or even late in the third. So probably the under 1.5, under 2.5, the best ways to go about it. And I think the juicier options, Khamzat round one plus 270, round two plus 500, then round one sub plus 430, round two sub plus 850. I project value on his sub prop. I project value on his inside the distance prop. I just think if he's going to finish the fight, it's likely in the first two rounds, or at least the first 12 and a half minutes. So I'd rather have the SGP angles or the sub props early instead of betting the whole fight for Khamzat to finish it. So Billy, what did I miss in terms of my breakdown? What are your thoughts in terms of live betting this fight and timing? Because I know you like DDP live, but when are you timing it? Is it after round 1? Is it midway through round 2? And then go ahead and give out your bet for this fight and where you found it, because it could be the best way to bet on the favorite.
Yeah, I'll start with my bet. It's the Khamzat Chimaev in any of the first 3 rounds. That's even money at FanDuel. I played with pretty much every combination of SGP at various books you can find. You can get a slightly better price by cutting off a few minutes at the end of the 3rd round. I don't hate that. I think if it's a 3rd round finish, it's probably in the first half or so of that. We see more finishes at the start of any round, just because guys get that minute off and come out fresh. The interesting thing here is, you mentioned the lack of the overtraining and the conditioning coach pulling him back. I don't think the problem for Khamzat was ever that like his physical cardio was bad. I'm sure his VO2 max is great. I would honestly probably bet on him if we said these two guys were going to run a 6-mile race or whatever. But the conditioning coach can pull him back in the gym, but he can't pull him back in the fight. And Khamzat comes out so aggressively and works so hard and explodes so hard. That's where it gets him. DDP does the same thing, but he does it intermittently. Khamzat's at 100 the whole fight. He's, revving the engine right at that red line until the fight's over or he runs out of gas. Du Plessis is a little bit better about like bursting with that. He'll give you a hard combo, then he'll circle out and reset. Or, he'll explode to get on top in the ground, kind of throw you down, take a minute before he sits up and starts overexerting himself. I think that's more where the cardio angle is here. The thing that worries me about Chimaev is he's never really fought a full-size middleweight before. He fought Usman at middleweight. That was Kamaru Usman taking the fight on short notice, and Usman almost beat him late. Robert Whittaker, former middleweight champ, but was a welterweight, is not the biggest middleweight. Khamzat didn't, out-technique him. He didn't even get the choke under his neck. He just smashed his face because he's so much bigger and stronger. This is the first time we've ever seen him fight someone he doesn't have a huge size and strength advantage over. I think DDP is actually probably going to look a little bit bigger in the cage. I'm not confident in that. We'll see once we get him, rehydrated and pumped up and all that good stuff. That's what worries me for him, for Chimaev, because he's really going to have to work hard if he wants that early stoppage. And then, probably at the end of round 1, if Chimaev does his usual stuff and lands a few takedowns, will be a fine entry point. It's more of just a risk tolerance thing, though. If you want to wait till midway through or the end of the 2nd round, you might get a better price. I expect the turnaround point to be somewhere in the 3rd round. It's just a matter of timing it. So those are tricky. I also wouldn't fault anyone if you just wanted to do the inverse of that bet. FanDuel offers the rounds 4, round 5, or by decision on DDP, and that's like, I think 4-to-1-ish odds right now, or last I looked. So any of those versions late, it's sometimes hard for us Eastern time zone people to be live betting at 1 in the morning after 13 fights or whatever. So I wouldn't fault anyone for trying to get those in pre-fight.
Let's move on to our fight of the night. Aaron Pico making his UFC debut, about a -160 favorite against Lerone Murphy, unbeaten in his career, coming in as a +135 underdog, the proven UFC fighter, but a very public underdog selection this week. About 65% of my public sample picking Murphy across multiple data sets. I've seen a lot of love for him this week just because he has faced better competition, has shown that he is a very educated striker and a well-rounded fighter. But Aaron Pico, for me, one of the more high-level wrestlers that has come into the UFC in a little bit, just in terms of his skill set. He's also extremely well-rounded, and he does have a power advantage over Lerone Murphy. Now, my caution in terms of betting Pico here initially was wondering in his UFC debut whether he was going to attempt to wrestle, whether he was going to proactively wrestle. It's not something he always does in his fights, and also getting signed to a new promotion. You would figure a guy would want to put on a show. But as I said, Khamzat has been training in Cali with Arman Sarukian and Pico. And if those 3 guys are training together, you know that both Khamzat and Pico are going to proactively wrestle. So considering that fact, considering Murphy getting held on bottom for about 7.5 minutes by Makwan Mirkani, I think Murphy a better offensive grappler than he is defensively. And I think Pico can land takedowns here when he wants them. And he also mentioned, I watched an interview with Pico this week. He mentioned about being active with elbows from top position, not just, that was what really sold it to me on, this guy is going to go for takedowns. He talked about landing damage, but specifically about landing elbows from top control and being active even after landing takedowns and being exciting even if he's going to wrestle. So that seemed to indicate to me, okay, this guy knows he's going to wrestle, but needs to find a way to make his fight exciting if he's going to do so. Don't necessarily love laying juice on a guy coming over from Bellator, but the market and the betting percentages on Murphy dictated to me this week that Pico is the clear side of the fight. I make him closer to minus 200, minus 220. I would bet him up to about minus 200. And then there's also value on his KO prop as well. I don't know if I like that nearly as much as the money line, but I make his KO prop closer to plus 250. You can get 4-1 out there. Billy, you're taking the opposite approach. You're going with Murphy pre-fight, though the line has moved in a little bit. So I'm curious if you still like it at current numbers because it has moved down. You also like his point spread plus 3.5, and then you would live bet Pico, I'm assuming, after round 1.
Yeah, the more I think about it and listen to you discuss it, I think probably the sharpest way here is to come in with that plus 3.5 on Lerone Murphy. That's minus 165. I was hoping we'd get a better price on it. The fight is roughly minus 200 to go to a decision. DraftKings has gotten much, much better at pricing those, so it's not like the huge value these used to be. In a strange way, it reminds me of the Petr Yan Marcus McGee fight with that dynamic, where I think Murphy fairly likely to win round 1 and then fade, partially because he's coming in on short notice. He's always in great shape. I don't think of him as a cardio liability or anything, but he took this fight on somewhat short notice. It was supposed to be Movsar Evloev versus Pico. That didn't happen. And I did the full breakdown on this one. Totally agree with you about him working hard to do damage from the top. Pico is not great at holding you down because he takes chances to do damage and get up and hurt you from the top. And he knows he's in better condition than you. So if you get up, great, he'll just take you down again. And what I noticed is in a lot of his fights, guys faded fast against him because he was repeatedly taking them down, making them work, making them get back up. That lines up perfectly with Lerone Murphy, who gets taken down all the time. He doesn't really even try to defend takedowns, but he's given up less than 45 seconds of control time per takedown surrendered in the UFC. So he's not spending a lot of time down there. He gets himself back up easily. I like that Murphy doesn't concern himself with defending the takedown because that lets him strike more effectively. Taller and longer, should be able to win points at range. What I think is going to happen is Murphy will have a solid, 60-40 first round, probably wins it, but he'll just get tired of defending all the takedowns. Pico will take over. Hopefully Murphy can make it to the bell, and if we get that live bet on Pico after round 1 to go with the Murphy plus 3.5, just like we did on Yan and McGee, maybe we can thread that needle and hit both those bets. But at worst, the price we get on Pico after round 1 should be enough that it's not a horrible outcome either way.
Football season's here, folks. We got some huge improvements and updates coming on the award-winning Action Network app, which we're very excited to discuss in the weeks ahead. But to get the most out of the app, you'll still need to be an Action Pro subscriber. It's only with Action Pro you get real-time pick alerts from me and the entire Action Network team of experts. Plus, you can access pro projections powered by Sean Kerner and our predictive analytics team, plus a ton of other benefits. And right now, Action Network podcast listeners can save $20 off the annual price of Action Pro. Just go to actionnetwork.com/pro and use code POD20. That's actionnetwork.com/pro and use promo code POD20 for $20 off the annual price of Action Pro. Let's move to our favorite underdog section for this week. Billy and I obviously have different processes for which we go about this. When it comes to underdogs, unless there's somebody that really stands out where I think off the bat, this line is grossly mispriced, I'm generally going off of my projections and finding the fighters, finding the favorites that I think are most overweight on a given week. I have a system by which my model balances out the money lines. The 2 money lines that popped up for me this week were the same 2 that Billy had already entered in the sheet before me. So if you consider that Billy's process, probably 80-20 tape versus public perception, maybe even 90-10. My process the other way, maybe 80-20 math, public perception model versus tape. And we both arrived at the same exact conclusion on the same 2 underdogs being undervalued. Certainly fills me with a little more confidence. Happy to have a couple of consensus underdogs this week. And then a third that I will touch on at the end. But let's start off with Brian Battle against Nursultan Ruziboyev. Battle going back up to 185 after struggling to make weight. 170, winning a split decision in his last fight against Randy Brown. He is a potential tweener, maybe 175, his ideal weight division if it did exist. Does have a 1-inch reach advantage over Ruziboyev. Ruziboyev, the bigger man, 4 inches taller, a little bit thicker think he is the more natural middleweight, and we do like the bigger man in this fight. I projected Ruziboyev at plus 108. I would bet him down to plus 120. Billy, what did you see in terms of the tape that led you to Ruziboyev this week?
Ironically enough, this is probably the one fight that I used more of a Sean Zerillo-esque process on. And not that I actually dug into how many people or the percentages, but when like Fraud Zaboyev was trending on Twitter and everyone is calling this guy out for being overrated, like the public perception has just shifted so far away from a guy who's decent, right? Like he's not as great as he looked when he knocked out Bruno Ferreira in his first fight, but he's 4-1 in the UFC. His only loss was a decision to Joaquin Buckley. Like that is a solid resume for a guy. Kind of just spams big right hands, but he trains in Philly with like Sean Brady and Andre Petrosky and all those grapplers, so he can grapple. Brian Battle, kind of the same thing. He's just been overwhelming guys with size and power, but he's been overwhelming welterweights with size and power while failing to make the weight class. Now he's coming up to 185, fighting a bigger guy. Honestly, similar to the Khamzat dynamic, where when your whole thing was size and strength over someone, and now you don't have that, hard for me to see why you should be favored. I think this is a reasonably close fight until somebody lands a big shot. I think it's probably Ruziboyev first. He's got the height. I think he would also have the grappling advantage should either of them try it, but I'm not really expecting that to be a big factor here. And to be clear, if Brian Battle was plus money, I'd probably bet him too. It's hard for me to see him as a favorite coming up a weight class when that physical advantage was such a big part of his game at 170. And it was outright cheating when you don't make weight and then bully people with size. Like, so there's part of that too.
Absolutely. Let's move on to another fight. Karine Silva against Diane Barbosa in the women's flyweight division. Barbosa actually has a head-to-head win over Silva from 2019. And I assumed, seeing the odds, knowing that in fact, that Silva was significantly younger. I think there's like a 6-month age gap between these two. It's less than a year, I believe. So Silva is not some prospect in her 20s that is still making significant improvements. These are both finished products. Silva does have the better UFC win. She also trains with a better camp, arguably, with the Fighting Nerds, but was too popular of a selection for this week in my projections. I make Barbosa about plus 140. I would bet her to plus 150. I also make her decision prop about plus 200. You can bet that at plus 280 currently. And I also like the fight to go to a decision as well. I think there's value on all three. Barbosa, money line, Barbosa decision, and fight goes to decision. Billy, was it purely the first fight between these two? I know it's from 2019, so it's quite a while ago. What led you to Barbosa as the value side of this fight?
Yeah, I mean, this is partially just a classic. We have a fight we highly expect to go to a decision. It's going to be close, hard to pick a side. One fighter is getting, much better money line odds. Partially, it's just the dynamics here, though. Karine Silva primarily wins via grappling. Diane Barbosa was the reason she has less fights, despite being a little bit older and less of a resume, is because she was competing in judo and jiu-jitsu at a high level before transitioning to MMA. You can't take a grappling-based game plan into a fight against her and expect to have success. Almost a little bit like the Amanda Hebus Tabitha Ricci dynamic from about a month ago, where Barbosa, like Ricci, has the judo and jiu-jitsu, where the other fighter just has one of those things. I know Hebus also has a judo black belt before the commenters come at me. So it'll be a fairly close fight where one fighter has the better top control and takedowns via her judo. And that fighter we're getting plus money on, and we expect it to go to a decision. And again, as you pointed out, this is a rematch. I was very surprised to see that. Just the third pro fight for Barbosa at the time where Silva had like 10 or 11. Probably, if anything, you could make the case that Barbosa has progressed more since then than Silva, just in terms of the amount of experience. The experience differential at the time, I should say. So all the above, agree with your takes on it as well. I think that's a really good price we're getting on her.
Last fighter to make the scales this morning, Jessica Andrade, just getting to the scales at 116 pounds as she returns to the strawweight division. This has historically been the division where she has had her most success, just has a massive power advantage over most strawweights. Very physical, is getting pretty late in her career, but I do think Andrade, in terms of projections, is the value side of her fight against Lupi Godinez. Now, Godinez, in terms of stylistic matchups, seemingly should be able to take Andrade down and potentially finish her, because Andrade, when things are going against her at this point, she seems to give up in her fights and allow opponents to submit her and get out of there. So I don't necessarily love Andrade going against the chain wrestler who can also box, but back down at strawweight, I do think she is probably a little bit undervalued. And also, this fight, not betting it straight to go to a decision, but this is another fight that is juiced to go to a decision. I projected Andrade by decision at plus 170. You can bet it as high as plus 270. And I also make this money line about a coin flip. You can bet her at plus 125. So Andrade to plus 110, Andrade by decision to about plus 200, I think are both viable value bets. I'm just not super confident in either given this stage of her career. If this was flyweight, though, I certainly wouldn't be betting it. Since she's coming back down to strawweight, I'm a little bit more intrigued by it. Billy, thoughts on Andrade and Godinez this weekend?
Yeah, Jessica Andrade is the female Kevin Holland. She goes back and forth between two weight classes, mainly because she wants to stay super active. I believe she fought 5 or 6 times in 2023. Just one of the more active women in the sport. And she's much, much better when she actually cuts the weights and makes 115. You know, it's a smaller distance between those weight classes than it is for Holland. But I think it's not just the fact that she's fighting smaller fighters, but also the discipline she has to have in camp to make that weight class also makes her a better fighter along the way. Like her at this price, she's not old. She's just got a lot of mileage. I mean, she had 29 UFC fights and she's 33 years old. She's only like a year older than Loopy, or year and a half, something like that. I do worry about the mileage a little bit. I'm on the Andrade side as well. I'm just hoping for a better price. Might be a good DFS salary saver, though. I think is probably where I'll have most of my Andrade exposure, because if there is a finish, it's probably Andrade's power, not Loopy's wrestling. So the floor is a decision loss. The ceiling is a knockout win. That's the kind of fighter I want to target.
Let's move on to our top prop section. There is one fight that we are kind of head-to-head on this week, though I believe either of us would respect the other's opinion in terms of how we're betting this fight, because I think it's pretty obvious in terms of the cardio dynamic being Mikhail Oleksiejczuk and Gerald Meerschaert. Mikhail early, Meerschaert potentially late. Mikhail used to fight at light heavyweight, now cuts down to middleweight. What I really like, he's 8 years younger and also moved his camp full-time to Fighting Nerds. Was only at Fighting Nerds briefly before his last matchup against Dricus Du Plessis. Did a full camp at Fighting Nerds this time around. So I'm expecting his grappling defense, which has historically been the weakest part of his game, to continue to improve. He's training with Rodolfo Vieira, who's there now, Caio Bahayo, who's the backup fighter for the main event, basically the head coach of that team, but a high-level grappler who can give Mikhail some really good rounds in terms of defending the grappling. So I just expect the defensive grappling, the worst part of his game, to continue to improve with him training at a grappling-oriented camp, because they have some good strikers there like Prates and Gene Silva, but they do have some very good grapplers in the room as well, and specifically in his division in terms of Vieira and Bahayo. And I don't really think GM3 likes getting pressured. You see him circling into Khamzat's power hand when he gets knocked out. There's going to be a big speed differential in this fight early. And most specifically, Mikhail, what he does that I love a lot, he'll mix it up to the body and head. He'll find combinations to the head, and then when you cover up, he'll rip you to the body, especially backing you up against the fence. So I like him round 1 KO plus 145, but I also like the under 1.5 rounds at minus 125. GM3, not out of the question that he finds a way to get a submission here in a scramble, gets knocked down, Mikhail jumps on top, GM3 gets something off of his back, or potentially even just finds a way to get a guillotine in the first 7.5 minutes of the fight. So I think the under 1.5, more than fine at minus 125. Mikhail round 1 KO, plus 245, a little bit short, but I think it ends up hitting. And you could also bet a same game parlay with Mikhail in the under 1.5 rounds at plus money. I just prefer that round 1 prop, I think, if you're betting it. But live after round 1, live after 7.5 minute mark on GM3, because down the stretch, GM3 late by sub, I think is certainly a viable angle. Billy, you're going GM3 round 3 sub, or no, GM3 by sub at plus 450. So you think this could take part at any point in the fight? Do you think, though, it's likelier to occur later in rounds 2 or round 3?
I'm not sure. That's always a tough question with submissions, because the overall rate is higher early, but a guy like Oleksiejczuk who slows down, maybe it's late. I'm not that worried about it, though, because it's plus 450 when GM3's money line is less than half that. And 12 of his 13 UFC wins are submissions, while 5 of Mikhail's of his 7 UFC losses are by submission. Both guy in this fight is really good at what the other one's bad at. I love your round 1 knockout pick. I looked at both of those. It's just the price adjustment for Mihail on the round 1 knockout or knockout in general wasn't nearly as drastic as it was for GM3. We'll probably end up betting both of it. GM3, when he loses, He gets knocked out. Mikhail, when he wins, he gets knockouts, and vice versa on submissions the other way. Feels like a fairly obvious dynamic here. Yes, Mikhail's grappling is going to be a little bit better training with Fighting Nerds for 6 months. GM3 has been submitting everybody in the UFC for like 15 years. He's a high-level black belt. You're not going to catch up in one training camp. So very, very obvious grappler versus striker binary. I think you're right about the early versus late dynamic is also there as well. But at plus 450, I'm not getting picky and trying to shoot around. A quarter unit to win more than one. More than happy with that.
Consensus under that we like for this week between Jeff Neal and Carlos Pratas. The under 2.5 rounds at minus 122. The fight to end inside the distance, closer to minus 160. I projected this fight, though, to end inside the distance around minus 200 in terms of an actual number. Pratas taller and longer, 2 inches taller, 3-inch reach advantage. Another Fighting Nerds member, but more of a striker, more of a Muay Thai kickboxer. Likes to stand at range. Jeff Neal going to try to counter him. I do worry, Billy, in terms of betting this under, that this is one where we get knockdowns on both sides. We get a lot of volume. We get a lot of screaming from the announcers. And then it goes all 15 minutes and we get some weird scorecards and a split decision. So this could be a scream at your TV because nobody finishes under. But I do think given the pace, the lack of striking defense from Pratas, who only defends strikes at 48%, Neal's willingness to engage and go into the fire, it seems like somebody probably falls here. So where do you like the under up to in terms of pricing? And then who do you think comes out on top?
Yeah, I took the under 2.5 at minus 122 rather than the ends inside the distance. Same thing. Like they're, I'd say, appropriately priced, or the difference between those is appropriate. I like Pratas here, and I think he's going to win. I think if he wins, it's probably with a knockout where Neal has more decision equity. But when the unders or the fight ends inside the distance is a better price than Pratas' money line, it just makes more sense to me to open all that up. Did the full breakdown of this one. Neal is really going to have to press forward and kind of come into range because he is the shorter and stockier fighter. His struggles, the guys who have beat him, are all taller, longer fighters like Carlos Pratas. Neal could certainly land once he gets in there, which is why I like the inside the distance for the under 2.5. But he's going to have to wade through a lot of fire to get there, which is where Pratas' advantage is. Other fun little stat, if you don't count fights against Ian Gary, neither of these men have seen a decision in a very long time. They both went to close decisions against Ian Gary, who has an innate talent to not have anyone get finished in his fights and suck the fun out of things. Outside of those Gary fights, both these guys either, in Pratas' case, win by knockout, or Neal either win or lose by finish. So likely this one gets done. I just think it's a better value than taking Pratas straight up.
One more fight I like from a prop perspective. Billy's got a prop in the best bet section that we'll get to later. Chase Hooper against Alexander Hernandez. Hooper's 7 years younger, the bigger man, 4 inches taller, 2-inch reach advantage. We've also just seen him come into his own physically in the lightweight division. And he just has way better cardio and tenacity here against the fighter who typically fades down the stretch. Hernandez, often a fast starter, typically wins round 1, typically hurts his opponent in round 1, and then declines the longer his fights go, goes to a number of close decisions, or is capable of getting finished down the stretch of his fights. I like this fight to end inside the distance. I projected it around minus 180. You can bet it at minus 150. I think Hooper absolutely live to get nuked in the first round like he did by Steve Garcia. If not, I think he drowns Hernandez on the mat. Hernandez is a good grappler. I just don't think he's going to be able to keep up with the physicality and the tenacity of Hooper's top game. So Hooper inside the distance at plus 114. I make that line about minus 110. And then Hooper round 2 at plus 450, or round 3 at plus 700. Some late round stabs that I think are absolutely viable given the cardio dynamic of this fight. Also, Hooper live after round 1, certainly an entry point as well. Billy, any interest in betting on Hooper Hernandez any angles of the ones that I mentioned that you like?
No, I do like Hooper inside the distance if you can get plus money. My, not conspiracy theory, but operating theory here is that Chase Hooper did not want to hurt Jim Miller or finish him unless he could pull off like some stupid, cool, never before seen submission, because he just kept trying dumb stuff that like wasn't going to work and refused to hit him in that fight. Before that, he had finished 3 straight fights, uses ground and pound really effectively to set up submissions, but again, did not want to hurt Jim Miller.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting a better price on this just because we saw that last fight where it's like, oh, he couldn't even finish old man Jim Miller. He could have. He just didn't want to.
Yeah, I bet that fight the exact same way, given a very similar cardio dynamic. I'm happy to run it back. It was a fight where he was just like sitting on top of Jim Miller, had passed his guard, was in full mount, and like you're just waiting for the finish to come, and it never materialized. So yeah, I absolutely agree. I think he dragged Jim Miller to a decision in that fight. Before we move on to our best bets, it is fantasy football season. The ultimate 2025 fantasy football draft kit is here. Sean Kerner and Chris Raybon have rankings, tiers, cheat sheets, and more to help you navigate your fantasy football drafts. New subscribers to Fantasy Labs NFL can use code FLEX20 for $20 off at fantasylabs.com/flex. That's promo code. That's $20 off with code FLEX20 at fantasylabs.com/flex. Also, our Fantasy Flex podcast crew is having a life. Let me run that back. 3, 2, 1. Also, our Fantasy Flex podcast crew is having a live event later this month. So here's Chris Raybon with some details.
Fantasy Flex listeners, we've got a big announcement. We'll be having a live event on August 23rd presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Joe's on Weed Street in Chicago. I'll be there. Sean will be there. We'll have special guests as well. It's free to attend. You just need to RSVP. There's a link to RSVP in the episode description. Excited to see y'all there. Again, that's August 23rd at Joe's Bar on Weed Street in Chicago. Fantasy Flex live event presented by Yahoo Fantasy.
Thank you, Chris. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to diving into all the fantasy football tools that we have available to us over the next couple of weeks as I prepare for my draft 2 weeks from today. I have to find time to actually prepare for that, given all these fights that we have. Really looking forward to this card. As I said, my best bet for this weekend, a very binary fight. The first fight on the main card between Tim Elliott and Kai Asakura. This fight is around -110 to end inside the distance. I projected this closer to -200. I think this matchup is extremely binary. Typically, flyweights finish closer to a 55% clip. Obviously, I have that closer to 67% in this matchup. But Elliott, 38 years old, coming off of a 1.5-year layoff, nearly 2-year layoff. Asakura, 7 years younger, inch taller, 3-inch reach advantage, very explosive, and a big striking advantage. I think he clips Elliott, hurts him early, and puts him away. And if not, I think Elliott is able to take him down, implement his grappling, and potentially find a submission. I think there's value both on Asakura by KO and Elliott submission, +150, +850, respectively. I'm now just going to take the under 2.5 rounds at plus money, or the fight to end inside the distance at about a pick'em price. Billy, any thoughts on Elliott and Asakura this weekend, and are you joining me on this under?
Yeah, that was my read too. I've wanted to get to Tim Elliott as an underdog here, but I just can't quite get there. He has a little bit of that Michael Johnson in him where he's going to lose to guys he shouldn't, but also beat guys he shouldn't. That was my recollection of it, but then I went and looked back, and he has a lot of what I would deem moral victories against higher-ranked opponents where, wow, Tim Elliott really acquitted himself well in there, but just couldn't quite walk away with his hand raised. I think that's probably the likeliest case here. He's more competitive than the line would imply, but at some point, Asakura finds the button and puts him out. So I'm with you. I probably would lean to Asakura with the finish rather than just the inside the distance, but given the awkwardness that is Tim Elliott, especially in the grappling department, yours would be a much more comfortable bet. So I'm with you on that one, mostly.
Jared Cannonier against Michael Venom Page, MVP in the middleweight division. Page, 4 inches taller, 2-inch reach advantage, even though he is the former welterweight, whereas Cannonier is a former heavyweight. Jared has the power advantage, likely has some grappling upside too. I think he needs to bully MVP up against the fence or land takedowns in order to win this fight. Generally, his success has come against people who were willing to strike and stand in front of him. RoboCop, Marvin Vittori, Kelvin Gastelum, guys who will just exchange in the pocket with him when guys can move around the cage. Adesanya, Imavov, Kyle Bahayo, Robert Whitaker. Cannonier has struggled a little bit more, and those guys have tended to pick him apart. So I think against the guy who can move well, who has the speed advantage like MVP, Cannonier needs to corral up against the fence, or as I said, take him down and put him flat on his back. And that's the bet that you like for this fight, Billy. It's Jared Cannonier to land 1+ takedown, over half a takedown at plus money. So what's your price target for that bet? And then how do you see this fight playing out? I like MVP by decision at around plus 120, but I certainly see the angle and the argument for Cannonier on the money line this weekend.
Yeah, my hot take is that MVP actually picks up his first UFC finish late in this one. Like, he kind of just finally finds the button on Cannonier, who has been taking a lot of damage. You know, we all thought he was dead against G-Rod before he somehow came back. Bad stoppage against Bahayo, but took a ton of, or bad no stoppage against Kyle Bahayo, where he took a ton of damage. Like, it's starting to add up on Jared Cannonier. But as you pointed out, those fights where he's had success, he took down Gregory Rodriguez despite being the way worse grappler in that matchup. 4 takedowns on Marvin Vettori, guy who's hard to take down. 1 takedown on Nasruddin Imavov, also a guy you would not expect Cannonier to initiate the grappling with. And MVP got taken down twice by Ian Gary, not really a grappler, and twice by Kevin Holland, who also grapples only accidentally. So it just feels like that's something that's going to be there. If you can get even money or better on 1 takedown, I would take that. Those move around all the time. As soon as I saw it, I posted it in the Action Discord, the Fights channel, where we hang out in there and talk bets. Not sure if it's exactly the same by the time you guys are listening to this, but that was the price I got. If it goes to over 1.5, I think I'd probably want like close to 2-1 odds. Getting that second takedown before he runs into trouble might be where I draw the line, but I do think he gets at least 1.
I projected MVP's money line here at minus 210. I'm actually a little bit interested now in maybe a same game parlay with Cannonier to land a takedown and MVP to win on the money line. A little reverse correlation, but 2 things I think are potential value bets. So something to look into as well. MVP still winning the fight despite Cannonier getting taken down. Billy and I lean towards him. Not a huge age differential here. He's only about 3 years younger, but as Billy pointed out, Cannonier taking a ton of damage in his recent fights. I think the cliff is likely coming for him at some point soon. And if I am betting one money line, it is actually MVP who's the value bet in terms of the projected odds, though I do like that Cannonier takedown prop quite a bit too. I think it's just how he needs to go about the fight if he wants to win. 3 other fights we didn't get to on this card. A couple have lines coming out late. One is the tough fight between Morales and Adiris. I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name. We have a Contender Series debutant, Bisanger Susarkayev, who won on Contender Series on Tuesday, making his UFC debut just 4 days later. He closed as a minus 375 favorite on Contender Series, opened minus 850 against Eric Nolan, the CFFC champion, for Saturday. Then the one main fight, the one fight that we have data, we have lines on that we didn't get to, is Edson Barbosa against Drakkar Klose. My model says close and goes to decision. I'm an Edson Barbosa fan, and both of these guys are decrepit and fragile. So I will probably be passing on that fight from a betting perspective. So Billy, let's start with Barbosa against Klose. Any thoughts you have on that fight? And then just give me your take on Bisanger, because you were very hype about him and his Contender Series win. I think you were calling him striking Khamzat or Khamzat 2.0. So any ways you might bet on his fight, and then any thoughts you have on Barbosa against Klose.
Yeah, I also lean Edson Barbosa. I think probably more out of heart than head. If you want something silly and fun and a good price, just do the Barbosa parlay with Dione and Edson together. Why not? You know, like, not financial advice, just to have a little bit of a fun sweat on that one. As far as Bisanger, he trains with Khamzat. He is also from Chechnya. Did a lot of fighting and training in Dagestan as well. And then Khamzat brought him in as like his primary sparring partner in California for this one, which is why he was available to take both the Contender Series fight and this fight on short notice. Wasn't even originally scheduled for the Contender Series. That fight was added late as well. So he's doing 2 late notice fights in the span of 5 days. But they're giving him a welterweight who's coming up. You know, guy is okay, but definitely not this level of prospect. I think Bisanger probably rolls through him pretty easy. We got minus 150 on his inside the distance on the Contender Series, which I took. Not getting those prices on that now. Other than heavy DFS exposure, I'm not sure how we handled that one. We don't even have salaries for him in that, though, so that might also be ridiculous. Kind of just in a holding pattern until we see some props. The one thing I will say is he does not wrestle offensively. He stands like Khamzat. He jumps in with the right hand like Khamzat, but he doesn't then wrestle. But he's undefeated with his first handful of fights, all being in Chechnya and Dagestan, which tells me he can probably defensively wrestle pretty well, because I don't see how you emerge from those areas with an undefeated record without having to fight some grapplers. So not worried about him getting taken down. Think this one mostly is contested on the feet, though. And I did not watch a single second of this season of The Ultimate Fighter, so I got nothing on those guys. I don't know about you, Sean.
Yeah, same for me as well on the tough guys. So we'll be passing on that fight. Props out for the Susur-Kaiev fight, so we will monitor those lines as they come out. I doubt we'll find anything actionable. His round one prop will probably be like minus 300. But, something does pop. We'll be sure to fire it in the Action Network app. But that'll do it for our UFC betting preview. You can find more UFC betting content for both Billy and myself on actionnetwork.com. If you'd like to instantly tell some of the bets that we discussed on today's show, look for the quick links both in the podcast and the video description, or visit actionnetwork.com/betnow. Don't forget to download the free award-winning Action Network app and sign up for Action Pro for immediate access to expert picks and analysis. Best of luck with all your bets this weekend. Enjoy the violence. Thank you for listening. See you back here next week.